is finally coming together. People of the audience are always saying, why haven't we seen this before? Why isn't every show like this? Very good question. A good question to ask the people of a rehearsing company is, what can we do to get the best out of you? I'll say no more. Actually, another question I have is, it's what I asked Rob on the first day of rehearsals. How far are you prepared to go? Granted, it was about Dogberry being a dominatrix, but now we are seeing actors at such theatres as here, Leeds Playhouse, the Globe, the RSC, the National Theatre Company, and they are now employing actors who are deaf, have disabilities, and are neurodiverse. Yes. Also, we have writers, directors, designers, producers, stage management of our community cropping up everywhere. For me, the definition of the word art is creative communication. Let's go forth and create some art. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Rob.
Thank you, Caro. If Caro Parker ever does ask you how far you're prepared to go, be vague. Just be vague. Thank you to Caro. Thank you to Paul. I'd like to ask Lyanna to come forward now for our third provocation. I'd like to welcome Lyanna Benjamin, who is Artist for Change Writer in Residence here at Leeds Playhouse.
Well, I'm going to try and follow that. That was fun, wasn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lyanna Benjamin. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a black woman sitting in an electric wheelchair, dark brown plaited hair, purple framed glasses, purple top, purple trousers, purple boots. There's a theme here. Before I share some of the things I've learnt as the Artist for Change Writer in Residence here at Leeds Playhouse, I would like to tell you a little bit about my writing journey so far. I never wanted to be a writer, let alone an artist. For the longest time, I thought an artist was someone who creates beautiful pictures or sculptures. I remember a teacher wrote on my school report, Lyanna is very passionate about her artwork. However, her drawings are very immature. To be fair, it was quite accurate. I was 14 and still drawing stick people, so being an artist wasn't on the cards for me, or so I thought. I was 18 when my health started to deteriorate. My independence gradually disappeared, and so did my dreams. I spent a long time trying to get my life back, but I slowly realized that the debilitating illnesses that were attacking my once healthy body were not going anywhere anytime soon. Writing has always been something I've done, but I didn't believe my writing was good enough. At the end of 2015, after a particularly difficult year, I decided enough is enough. And I wasn't going to allow my health to dictate my future. I applied for a community project, which led me to my first piece on stage, right here. It was called I Smile, and from there, things snowballed. I was so thrilled that my writing had become recognized, and I knew I had to pursue this career. I was accepted on the Leeds Playhouse Introduction to Playwriting course in 2017, which was led by Jackie, who was the literary associate. She encouraged me to apply for Grey Eye Theatre's Write to Play Year 5 playwriting scheme. And when I say encouraged, she metaphorically dragged me, kicking and screaming, because I didn't think I had the talent, ability, or energy to do such an intensive training course. 2018 was a challenging year. I second-guessed myself at every step of the way. However, I still managed to write a monologue, duologue, and a short play. They were performed by professional actors at various London theatres. And then I went on to apply to the BBC Writers' Room, Northern Voices. It's a training scheme for people who want to get into TV. I applied with Jackie's words ringing in my ears. Let them decide if you're good enough. At the end of 2019, I found out I made the cut. I was convinced 2020 was going to be my year. I think you guess how that turned out. Despite being heartbroken by the number of people I loved who died of COVID, witnessing firsthand the impact the pandemic has had on the disabled community, and being terrified of catching it myself, I received my first commission. I wrote Soul Food for the Burn Bright Theatre, which was about a daughter who was forced to say goodbye to her father over a Zoom call. This led to further opportunities to tell my story and how I felt abandoned by society during the pandemic, which ultimately led me to my dream job. I started at the beginning of this year, excited and terrified as the Artist for Change writer in residence. So, my role is broken into 4 areas. I co-designed, produced, and delivered the Introduction to Playwriting course with the amazing Rio Matchett to identify ways in which Leeds Playhouse can reduce the physical and invisible barriers that exist for disabled audience members and creatives that use the building. To learn the mechanics behind Leeds Playhouse in terms of how they produce work, and to have time to write without the pressures of deadlines, because they're great, aren't they? So what I've learned, I thought it was really difficult to just get a job, to find an employer who would not just see me as a risk, but see me as a talented asset to the company. What I didn't expect was to discover that the systems that are put in place to support people like me to get into work are not fit for purpose. And that's putting it nicely. Whilst I've learned what the role entails and to put myself in vulnerable situations and be successful at my job, I've also had to navigate the many obstacles the government have put in place for me just to exist. As well as doing my job, I've had to, every single day, fight my body that has struggled with a new routine. Sometimes it's been difficult to know when to say, actually today, I'm not feeling well, I can't come in. And when I push, and despite this pain, still do my job. One of the great things about this role is that I've had a flexible contract. Leeds Playhouse has been really supportive and allowed me to come into the building when I'm well enough and to also work via Zoom. That's one of the great things of the pandemic, it's given us lots of Zoom meetings. When most people are experiencing pain, they don't question it. It's not too much. If it's too much, they don't go into work. But because I'm in constant pain, I feel that it has to be incredibly bad before I say no to the projects I'm working on. With the support of the team, I've learned when to say no. I've discovered that traveling to and from work on public and private transport is a privilege not given to wheelchair users. I could do a whole keynote speech about that. I've learned this year that I don't have to do everything by myself, but then when you're around a team of people that will help you manage your workload. I know it may seem simplistic, but having a sounding board makes a huge difference. Having people who constantly champion you and wanting you to stretch and see that you're not a challenge, that you're a valued member of the team. It's an amazing thing. So I'm just going to tell you a few of the things I've achieved this year. I've had the pleasure of mentoring 8 writers. And it's amazing when you see writers who, and I call them writers now, because at the beginning, they were aspiring, they were hoping to write. And then we gave them the tools to write their own pieces and see their work come to life on stage. And it's been amazing to watch them grow. I delivered my first masterclass at Doncaster Theatre. I've changed some of the physical barriers that are in the building. Don't even get me started about doors. With the support of the team, we've established the Yorkshire Disabled Creatives. And that is just an amazing thing that is allowing disabled creators in Yorkshire to develop and to support one another. I am an ambassador for DANK, and I'm also I'm on the board of directors for CCC. I've interviewed the director of Nine Night, Amanda Huxtable, and I've written an article for the Nine Night programme, and that's going to be on the Leeds Playhouse website. I think I can share that I have a commission for a 70-minute play. I'll tell you more about that when I'm allowed to. Sorry, Amy. I've also had 2 monologues published in an anthology. It's called Hear Me Now, Volume 2, and it's available at Amazon and great bookstores. And I've found my professional voice. What would I like the industry to do? Whilst there is a desire for disabled-led stories, until the industry stops scrambling to improve representation as part of a box-ticking exercise, but starts being proactive and removing the barriers, we will continue to see the same tropes and stereotypes on our screens and stages. The way we tell stories shouldn't be confined by the industry's tried and tested formulaic approach. If the industry really does want fresh, compelling, disabled-led stories, they need to allow us to create in our own way without constantly comparing us to non-disabled counterparts. Why are initiatives like this necessary? Without the support of Ramps on the Moon and Leeds Playhouse, I wouldn't have discovered that I enjoy mentoring. I am passionate about problem solving, and I thrive under pressure, well, sometimes. Viola Davis said in her Emmy acceptance speech, "The only thing that separates a woman of color from anyone else is opportunity." This is also true for disabled people. Without the many opportunities I've been given, I wouldn't be here today. We need access to education. We need scripts and books in different formats. We need access to mentoring and peer support. How can we deliver work if we can't see people doing that work? And we need our access needs to be met and not to have to keep fighting for them. And we also need the time and space to develop. I never wanted to be a writer, let alone an artist, but that's who I am. I want to continue to write compelling stories that entertain, educate, and affect the audience. I wish I didn't have to be an activist fighting for basic human rights and the right not just to exist, but to thrive. Can you imagine if everyone in this room united in fighting for an inclusive industry, worked together to remove the barriers that exist, and hired people like me, yes, we need the money, to not just meet their diversity quotas, but because they see us as invaluable? the way in which we tell stories would change, but also lives would change. Thanks to Ramps on the Moon and Leeds Playhouse, my amazing mentors and cheerleaders, you know who you are, my life has changed. My dreams are finally coming true, and I'm helping disabled creatives to see that a career within the arts is possible. I am Lyanna Benjamin, and I am a writer. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lyanna. Lyanna and Paul and Caro and I are now going to join you in the audience and introduce Amy Leach and Ben Wilson to give the keynote speech.
Perfect. These microphones are so good, we've decided we're not going to do a speech. Instead, we're going to debut our new country and western duo. So settle in. Hello, my name's Ben Wilson. I'm a big white bloke with short blonde hair and a scruffy beard, and I'm wearing an incredible paisley shirt today. Yeah, absolutely. I am a blind actor and theatre maker and audio description consultant, which means Caro is right. I am going to go on a lot about audio description, so settle in. My relationship to Ramps on the Moon is that I was the Ramps on the Moon agent for change at Sheffield Theatres for 5 years, and also had the great pleasure of working on the previous 2 Ramps on the Moon shows. Oliver Twist, that was made here on this very stage at Leeds Playhouse, and then Much Ado About Nothing, which we are currently stood on the set of. And who are you?
Hello. I mean, I'm just very excited right now. I'm so pleased that everybody's here. Hello, my name's Amy Leach. I'm a petite white woman with my hair scraped back in a scruffy bun, always with a pencil in my hair. I'm Deputy Artistic Director here at Leeds Playhouse. And during my 5.5 years here, I've had the honour to be heavily involved with our work and commitments as a Ramps on the Moon partner. I class myself as pre-disabled. I don't yet identify as disabled. That's not my lived experience so far. But I know that I, like pretty much everyone here, will become disabled at some point in my life.
Yeah, and we thought it'd be useful, in order to talk about creative access and why it's so wonderful, to talk about our own journeys with creative access. And so, me, like most disabled people, I wasn't born disabled. I became disabled in my early 20s when I lost my eyesight, which meant that, to my shame, I spent the first 21 or so years of my life completely ignorant to disabled culture, disabled art, disabled politics. And I often imagine a parallel universe where I spent those first 21 years being exposed to disabled stories being told on mainstream platforms. I think if that was the case, then I would have found the transition from being non-disabled to being disabled far easier. Because instead, I spent those first 21 years only being exposed to what I think are quite toxic narratives around disability told by non-disabled people. And so that transition from being non-disabled to being disabled became incredibly difficult. But for me, perhaps one of the most shocking and disappointing parts of that process was when I first went to the theatre as a visually impaired person and first experienced and had my first encounters with theatre audio description. Now, whenever I talk about what I think are theatre's failings towards blind and visually impaired audiences, I always want to give the caveat that this is not a criticism of audio describers. Because traditional audio description is an incredible skill that takes years and years to get really good at. Audio describers work their absolute socks off with next to no help from the organisations and the theatre makers that they work with. They provide a service that is invaluable, making inaccessible world of theatre accessible. But wouldn't it be a little bit easier to, instead of trying to make inaccessible shows accessible, we just made accessible shows? Save everyone an awful lot of time. The simple fact of the matter is that, in my opinion, traditional audio description is a bit shit. It doesn't provide a positive experiences for blind and visually impaired people coming to the theatre. For starters, audio-described performances are so rare and infrequent. If all my friends are going to the theatre on the Wednesday night, but the audio-described performance is on the Thursday night, then I can't go, or I have to go on my own, on me Todd. And then the headsets we have to wear are incredibly uncomfortable. But worse than any of that, it becomes immediately obvious that the director, the cast, the producers, the writer, the whole team making the show have given next to no thought to the audio description. They've spent hours and hours obsessing over every little detail of the show, and then they've not even bothered to have a conversation with the person who's going to be delivering the audio description. I mean, let alone taking sort of creative control of it themselves. And so, on the rare occasion that audio description is available, you know, on a big run of a show, it might be once or twice during the run, it means I'm made to feel like, at best, a second-class member of your audience, a second-class citizen in your theatre. I spent half my life going to the theatre. I love it, but I could honestly count on one hand the amount of times I've been to see a show and felt like my experience as a blind or member of the audience has been given any sort of value by the people making the show. I was given the same level of care or thought as every other member of the show. It blows my mind. The vast majority of directors who direct a show that has audio description on their show do not even listen to the audio description, do not even have a conversation with the person who will be doing the audio description. I don't understand. What does that say? It's like saying to your lighting designer, I don't care, do whatever you want, I'll just see it on press night. It's like saying to your cast, I don't care, get on with it. Which, as an actor, I can tell you sometimes would be quite useful. It looks at you. The result is that, in all honesty, the most disabled I ever feel can be when I get to the theatre. And I think that's heartbreaking. And after that first trip to the theatre as a visually impaired person, it set a fire in me to try and be part of the change, to try and improve this stuff. You know, I felt that experience, the disappointment of how little theatre cares about me and people like me. And so I was determined to try and do something about it. I started experimenting, watching some shows that did far more interesting and exciting things with audio description, educating myself about how AD can be done better, or how we can make work that works for blind and visually impaired audiences. It was a real joy. You know, this was mainly on my own quite small scale work, or occasionally when an artist would, you know, come and seek my advice. But big, established, big buildings like this, big established organizations, big established directors didn't want to listen. Honestly, I could not tell you how many times I had the conversation with various directors of various levels of their career about trying to get them to get stuck in and excited about audio description and to start playing and experimenting with the more creative and satisfying ways of approaching it that would hugely benefit blind and visually impaired audiences, but also unlock so much creative potential for everyone else involved. I'd always get the same response. They'd do the same smile and nod. I couldn't see it, but I could tell. They'd go, yes, that's really interesting. I'll have to think about that. And then I would never hear from them again, and nothing would change. There was a meeting I went to about 5 years ago, just after I started as Agent for Change. It was a Ramps on the Moon meeting at Birmingham Rep. Loads of people from all the Ramps on the Moon partners were there, and I thought, here we go. Loads of people trapped in a room. I will unload my thoughts and feelings about audio description. And over lunch, I met a director of the buffet, and they audio described the buffet to me and did a pretty good job. And I thought, here we go. Here's a willing victim. And so I gave my usual spiel about audio description. And guess what? I got the usual response. I got the smile, I got the nods, I got the, that's really interesting, I'll have to think about that. And I thought, right, never hear from her again, until a few weeks later, I got a phone call which said, hi Ben, it's Amy Leach from Leeds Playhouse. I was going to do an impression of you there, but I thought that might get me in trouble. Plus, I've not got the energy to do an Amy Leach impression. And I was shocked, and my mouth fell open, and that for me was the first of many times that Amy has proven to be a brilliant non-disabled ally to disabled artists and audiences, and a brilliant artist to collaborate with.
So, when I met Ben on that fateful day in the buffet queue, describing the sausage rolls to him, I'd been working as a freelance director and facilitator for about 14 years. In that time, I'd worked with disabled people in participatory settings, and I'd cast a couple of disabled actors within my work. But there was so much that I hadn't done, or even considered. Despite having studied some British Sign Language at university, it had never occurred to me to integrate BSL and deaf actors into my work. I'd never truly thought about the experience of a deaf or disabled audience member watching my work and factored that into how I made the show. I'd never thought about consciously casting a disabled person from the very seeds of an idea and how being conscious in that choice might affect the way we told the story or presented that character. And I'd never listened to the audio description on any show I'd ever worked on. I know, top for me. Now, I could use the excuse that for those 14 years I was a freelance artist, contracted only until press night and leaving before any of the Access performances took place. I could use the excuse that as a freelance artist I had maybe far less power to insist on access and inclusion than I do now as someone employed by a big organisation. I could use the excuse that there was no money budgeted for any of this. But really, when I look back on those 14 years, I'm ashamed of myself for not really thinking about any of this. And more than that, I'm gutted about all the time, all the shows, and all the potential collaborations with brilliant artists that I wasted by not grasping that access is so much more than occasionally providing the basics. What a waste of all that wonderful artistic potential. Which leads me back to the buffet queue and to Ben describing his experiences as a blind theatre goer. I pledged to myself that day that I would listen to the audio description on the next show I directed, which I did, and I encourage you all to do if you haven't done that before. I was shocked. Like Ben said, this is absolutely not a criticism of the brilliant, skilled work of audio describers. No, I was shocked at myself. Here was a layer to a show I had created that some of our audience was experiencing, and yet I had given no thought to it whatsoever. I'd made no space for this element of the work within the creative process. The choices I might have made hadn't been made, and I could hear so much artistic potential. So, the next play I was due to direct, I declared to the Playhouse team that every performance was going to have creative audio description available. Now, I hadn't a clue how we were going to do it. In fact, I was actually pretty frightened about doing it. But I thought if it got printed in the season brochure, then we would just have to figure out a way to do it. But I also knew that as a sighted person, I couldn't figure this out alone. So that's when I called Ben and asked him to join us as an audio description director, along with audio describer and access consultant Vicky Ackroyd, who is out there somewhere. I haven't yet seen him. Where are you, Vicky? Vicky, hello. So the play was Jim Cartwright's 80s classic Road. Now, any of you who know Road will know that the language is brutal and gritty and poetic. So we wanted to create audio description that matched just how filthy and visceral that language is. The other thing about Road is that it's about 99% of the play is monologues and duologues, which means that there's always actors available and twiddling their thumbs backstage. So kind of thinking, okay, how do we do this budget-wise? Okay, so there's always people available. So as part of the set, and massively, I have to say, inspired by Grey Eye's production of Reasons to be Cheerful, our designer Hayley Grindle added a 1980s phone box to the side of the stage. And throughout the whole show, different characters would disappear into that phone box and take it in turns to describe the production in character down the phone into audience headsets. And they hid their text inside an old copy of the Yellow Pages. And I think one of my favourite moments in the show was when an actor had to suck another actor's toes. And you can only imagine how filthy that was in the audio description. Making Road with Ben and with Vicky and all of that brilliant team who came on that journey with us, something clicked. A new set of creative possibilities had opened up. I felt like I'd been using the same box of paints to bring stories to life for my whole career, but had just discovered there was a whole nother level of colours that I didn't even know existed in that paint box.
So, 20% of the population in the UK is disabled. And so by being so inaccessible and exclusive, British theatre is denying itself 20% of its potential ticket sales. I mean, that's just a bit stupid in my opinion. Specifically, around 2 million people in the UK have some sort of sight loss or visual impairment. And I can tell you from personal experience, that is a community who are desperate for entertainment and cultural activities that welcome us, that are accessible to us. 20% of the population are disabled. Can you honestly say that 20% of the people on your stages or the stories that you tell are anywhere near 20% are disabled? If not, then you are failing to represent the communities that you're trying to sell tickets to. What percentage of your work has audio description, BSL, captioning, or happens in a relaxed environment? What percentage of your workforce, or the artists that you work with, or the people that you that take part in your community or engagement work are disabled? If it's, I'd be prepared to bet quite a lot of money that it's nowhere near 20%. So, we're going to talk a lot today about how working with creative access and engaging with that stuff on a creative level is really artistically satisfying. But it should not be forgotten, as Amy said, it adds paints to your paint box, or as I like to say, adds weapons to your arsenal, depending on how violent you like your metaphors. But it should also not be forgotten that failing to work with creative access, failing to work with the diverse range of access is a moral failing, and also a terrible business decision. Think about the audiences that you're failing to reach by not working with this work, and the talent pool of people you're denying yourself the opportunity to work with. There are disabled artists out there who, as we've already heard from, that have years and years of experience of working in this matter and making this sort of work. And they're just waiting to come into your lives, come into your organizations, your rehearsal rooms, to enrich in the stories that you're telling, and to collaborate with you to make art of the highest order. Look, these artists are just waiting for a platform that British theatre is denying them to change the world.
So as part of Ramps on the Moon, I'll wait for you, Steph. Hi, Steph. As part of Ramps on the Moon consortium for the last 7 years, here at Leeds Playhouse, and I know it's true for Sheffield Theatres, we have welcomed more and more disabled people into our lives, our organisation and our rehearsal rooms. From the work we make on stage, to our Agents for Change, to our artist development opportunities. We have so much further to go, and so much more to learn and to do better. But being part of this consortium has completely changed my own theatre-making journey. It's led to having the opportunity to work with an array of deaf and disabled artists who have shared their immense talent, exploded and expanded so many new casting possibilities, so many new ways of telling stories. It's breathed fresh life into tired stories, found new layers and revelations in stories we all think we know. It's evolved my audition and rehearsal processes in ways that have had a positive effect on all company members, not just those who identify as disabled. It's led to new friendships and experiencing fresh perspectives on the world. And I've discovered that far from being scary, it's been a joy. Challenging, yes. Stretching my craft, absolutely. But I'm well and truly hooked. I now can't read a script or dream up an idea without thinking about creative access, about disabled representation, and about which brilliant deaf and disabled artists I might have the good fortune to work with to tell that story. Since the end of 2019, I've directed 7 productions, and every single one has featured at least one layer of creatively integrated access and employed exceptional deaf, disabled, learning disabled, and neurodivergent artists on and off stage. So we want to share with you just a small handful, just kind of 3 examples of our favourite artistic discoveries of the last kind of 2 or 3 years. So the first one is, at the end of 2019, I remounted a family show for 3 to 7-year-olds called The Night Before Christmas. Now, it was about an elf who gets lost on Christmas Eve. He has to be returned to Father Christmas by midnight or he will die. It's quite high stakes. And there's a woman, there's a woman called Carol who hates Christmas, and it's her job to return elf to Father Christmas. And she, of course, rediscovers the love of festive joy. Now, the first time I directed this production back in 2016, I had given no thought to access or representation. But looking at the show with this new layer of paints, this new perspective, I realised that the central concept of the show was that the elf spoke Elvish, and that through gesture, Elf and Carol learnt to communicate and connect. So, second time around, working with the brilliant Paula Garfield from Definitely Theatre, we cast a deaf actor as Carol, and we integrated sign language into what was already a highly visual show, and to make it accessible for deaf audiences. Watching Elf and Carol sign Merry Christmas to each other as Elf flew off in Santa's sleigh, there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
So we've now got to the bit of the script where it says, Ben, don't forget to write this bit before you do the speech. So this could go horribly wrong. Now, so my year this year, 2022, has been all about accessible Shakespeare, which anyone who knows me here will know that's pretty much my dream. So I, as well as Much Ado, currently appearing on this stage, also the first half of this year, I worked with Amy on her production of Macbeth, that again happened on this stage, which had 4 brilliant deaf and disabled actors and had creatively integrated audio description. Now, I love doing integrated audio description on Shakespeare because it's really easy. Shakespeare's done half of the work for you. Think about, is this a dagger which I see before me, or I bite my thumb at thee, or, I don't know, I'll kiss thine lips. That is literally integrated audio description. Shakespeare's done half the work for you. No one ever enters into a Shakespeare play without someone announcing, look, what ho, it's Lord What's-His-Face. No one ever draws a sword without saying, I'm drawing my sword now. It's so easy. I always think about the prologue to Henry V, where the chorus invites the audience to imagine the pictures in their mind that they're going to have described to them. And it doesn't say, come and see our play, it says, come and hear our play. And that is what audio description is. It's beautiful writing, painting pictures in the minds of your audience who can't see those pictures. But Shakespeare is not just good for access for the audience. I think it's also the perfect vehicle for representation. As disabled people, we are generally missing from the canon of British theatre and British literature. We're either Tiny Tim or Richard III. We're either someone to be pitied and to feel sorry for, or someone to be terrified of. And in my case, both of those things are true, but it's not true of all disabled people. So what's really exciting about casting deaf and disabled and neurodivergent actors into Shakespeare plays is that it feels a little bit like we are reclaiming our place within the shared cultural consciousness of our country. Macbeth, early this year, we had 4 amazing actors. We had Ashley Wilder, Karina Jones, and Charlie Arrowsmith playing the witches and other roles. And we also had Adam Bassett, who is here today, playing Macduff. Love you, Adam, legend. And Adam is a brilliant deaf actor and director. And Adam played Macduff so well that I can now never imagine Macduff not being deaf. I mean, literally, he has a line, I have no words, my voice is in my swords. Come on, guys. And the moment in that show, every single person who came to see that show, the moment that every single person referenced to me after they'd seen it, was the scene where Macduff is told that his wife and children have been murdered. Now, the extra layer we had added into this scene is that the character of Lennox was made a hearing BSL interpreter, and it created this lovely, brilliant warrior bond between Macduff and Lennox, an old friendship that clearly been there for years. And so, as an audience member, you saw and heard Ross telling Lennox that Macduff's family had died, and then you had to watch a man interpret the facts that his best friend had lost his wife and children, whilst Adam, as Macduff, howled in pain and agony in reaction. Honestly, every time I watched that scene, it chilled me to my bones. Every single actor on stage was being brilliant, and it is the moment that every single audience member I spoke to remembered about that show, and it will always stay with me. It was incredible. And then, Much Ado About Nothing. Something that people keep saying to me about Much Ado About Nothing when they come and see it is that it's a very attractive cast. And they have paid me to say that. But what's really interesting is that actually, I thought about this the other day, that it's a show where disabled people, particularly our 4 disabled leads playing Hero and Claudio and Beatrice and Benedict, get to be gorgeous, sexy, leading actors. They get to be characters that fall in love, that have relationships, that have sex. There's one quite raunchy scene in a barn. Don't want to spoil it. And that is so rare. I think that is exactly one of those stories that I mentioned before I wish I'd seen growing up. When I found myself disabled in my early 20s, I thought my life was over. I thought my social life was over. I thought my love life was over, because that is what our culture tells us about disabled people. And that is why every night we're going out on stage and telling this story, that is what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about those pre-disabled people in the audience, those non-disabled people who will one day find themselves disabled. And I think by telling this story in the way that we're telling it, we're going to ease that transition. We're going to normalize the presence of disabled people and the lives and stories that disabled people tell. I don't think anyone could tell that I didn't write that bit. Over to you, Aaron.
Very good, Ben. Our last anecdote to share with you is that in early 2020, it was the turn of Leeds Playhouse to create the Ramps on the Moon production. We chose Oliver Twist as a title, and we asked the legendary playwright Bryony Lavery to adapt it. This meant that we could think about creative access from the word go. We could create characters specifically written for deaf, disabled, learning disabled, and neurodivergent actors. And we could include deaf and disabled history and look at how that had impacted on the characters' lives. Now, the character of Oliver Twist in the original story is a small child who has been starved of love and communication. And in our version, Oliver was also deaf, as were the characters of Fagin, our very lovely Caro down here, Artful Dodger, Bill Sykes, and Nancy. This meant that when we were in the Fagin's gang scene, the predominant language of that gang was British Sign Language. The iconic moments when Dodger and Oliver meet for the very first time was all the more joyful because it was a moment when Dodger taught Oliver his first few signs. It's one of my most favourite moments in that play, just that kind of way that suddenly this new language, this sharing, we as a kind of non-BSL using audience learning those signs along, it was just glorious. And one of my other absolute favourite moments in Oliver Twist was a theatrical moment that was completely born out of creative access. And it was the murder of Nancy by Bill Sykes. Now, the thing is, no one wants to watch that enacted in a naturalistic way. It's horrendous. In our version, Bill, played by the brilliant Stephen Collins, grabbed Nancy, Claire Louise English, another brilliant actor, grabbed Nancy by the throat, and then Nancy kind of extricated herself out of that hold. And then Bill continued to mime and to sign the murder of Nancy, whilst Nancy watched on and described her own death. Now, for people who couldn't hear, they got a very visceral, clear visual story. For those who couldn't see, they heard a really interesting creative description that was entirely fitting with the moment. And for those of us with all of our senses, we got a highly theatrical moment that spared us the graphicness of that story beat. Along with the Macduff scene that Ben described, it's one of the proudest moments I've ever created in theatre.
As you can tell, we both get very excited about this work. We've made some really exciting artistic discoveries over the last few years. But for me, the one memory that I think will stay with me for forever, it's quite a simple and small one, but had quite a profound effect on me. There was a day in the rehearsal room when we were restaging Oliver Twist to be filmed, available on NT at home right now. We were in the rehearsal room just next door here, in rehearsal room 1 here at the Playhouse, and we were working on that scene that Amy was just talking about, where Oliver meets the Artful Dodger for the first time. As Amy said, it's an amazing scene. The brilliant actors, Nadeem Islam and Brooklyn Melvin, actually smashed that scene out of the park. It was brilliant. But, however great that scene was, it was really difficult from an audio description point of view because it was mostly non-verbal. So, there was an afternoon we spent in the rehearsal room. Entirely, we had a cast, a room full of actors, creatives, directors, stage managers, everyone, pouring their heart and soul into getting the audio description right on that scene. And all chipping in these fantastically creative ideas about how best to tell that story to people like me. Now, for lots of you in that room, in this room, every time you go to the theatre, you will know that the people making that show have worked really, really hard to tell that story for you. But for lots of us, that is a very rare thing. Normally, we know that the show has been made for people not like us, and there'll have been some sort of bolted-on afterthought at the end to try and maybe make it work for us in the most basic possible way. And so, for me, on that day, I felt really moved. Again, people who know me, I don't get emotional very often. That day, I really did. I had to take myself off to a private little quiet moment at the end of the day, and just to try and just let it all sink in. I couldn't get over it. The simple pleasure of having a room full of brilliant artists telling me a story was incredibly overwhelming. It's one that I'd missed with all my heart since I lost my sight. And perhaps for the first time since losing my sight in that room, for that moment, I felt like a small corner of the theatrical room valued me. It was a reminder that despite the fact that British theatre regularly makes me feel the opposite, that I do belong and I am welcome in this industry.
We are absolutely thrilled that so many of you have joined us today in person or online. We know you're here because you want to take steps down this path or have already set out on that journey and want to learn more. This room, both physically and virtually, is filled with so many brilliant creative brains. And today we want to stoke those artistic fires, to encourage you to think of access not as something we should do to pat ourselves on the back, but as something that, when thought about from the very seeds of an idea, in conversation and collaboration with deaf and disabled people, it will make your practice and your work better and more exciting. Throughout the afternoon, whilst we're certainly no experts, we want to share ideas, tools, anecdotes, stimulus. And we want to acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of deaf and disabled legends who have been doing this work for donkey's years. So it's about time the rest of us got cracking. So we all need to get practicing. We don't have to do and try everything all at once, but let's all of us start to pack on muscle with every project so that our knowledge and our practice expands each time. Let's find ways to prioritise creative access in our budgets. I've done this by maybe on projects taking on the movement direction myself, or telling the story with one less actor to free up the money. Let's take our colleagues and our collaborators on this journey with us, and let's infuse them with why we need to start with the art and why it matters. Let's be open and flexible, and especially let's be vulnerable. Let's face our fears of saying or doing the wrong thing and not getting it right. As the brilliant and very wise director for change of Ramps on the Moon, Michelle Taylor, says, "If you wait until you're ready for everything to be perfect, you'll never get started. So let's take risks. Let's get things wrong. Let's fail. Let's try again and fail better." When I met Ben in that buffet queue 5 years ago, he planted seeds in my brain that have taken root and grown. It's been such an honour to work with brilliant, talented, innovative, and hugely generous deaf and disabled artists like Ben over the last few years, to collaborate with them to push the boundaries of what is creatively possible in making inclusive and accessible work. So in a moment, you'll all be joining a buffet queue to grab a cuppa and a biscuit. And there are so many brilliant deaf and disabled artists here today. So we invite you today to strike up a conversation about creative access with a stranger, like Ben and I did on that fateful day in Birmingham. We're so excited to think about all the seeds that might be planted today and the action those seeds might lead to. To finish, we'd like to thank colleagues from Leeds Playhouse, Sheffield Theatres and Ramps on the Moon for making today happen. It's been a huge amount of work involving very many people. And we'd like to thank all of you so much for making the time in your lives, which I know at the moment everybody has such busy lives. You've taken a moment in your lives to join us today. Let's all make sure that access is no longer an afterthought. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Rio, who's going to do a little bit of housekeeping about what happens next. Thank you, Rio.
Thanks. Sorry, this is going to be really perfunctory now. My name's Rio. I'm a white woman. I have long, browny, blondie, gingery-ish hair, and I'm clutching a clipboard like a toddler with a comfort blanket. It's making me feel safe. After I've wrapped up, and I'll try and do it very quickly, as Amy said, we'd love you all to head back up to level 2. I'm going to ask the cast and company of Much Ado, just give us a wave at the front. There they are, come grab them. There's some up here as well, some up here. We've also got our fantastic team of interpreters over here. Give us a wave, interpreters. So if you would like to talk with somebody who speaks a different language to you, please come and grab one of them. We've also got a couple of quiet breakout spaces, one just next to where we met by the bar, and then another one upstairs. And if you'd like to access one of those, grab any one of us or one of our brilliant front of house colleagues in the blue. Our marketing and comms team, give us a wave, marketing and comms. They're hiding at the back, sinister. They're also here to chat a bit about their journey. There's lots of artists in this room who've massively supported us again with our BSL flyers, our audio described flyers. They wanted me to stress again that, you know, we're not experts on this, we're on a journey, but they would love to chat with you about those processes and the things we have learned. And last but not least, I know it's impossible to choose between the amazing sessions that we've got today. So rest assured, everything is going to be recorded. We've got brilliant note takers working across all of the sessions, and we'll be sending out recordings and notes of everything afterwards. So you will be able to access all the content. But yes, you've got an hour's break, an hour to get chatting, and then you can either come back in here for the deaf perspective or head down to the Bramwell Rock Void studio, which is that way, right as you come out of this auditorium, for the blind perspective. And thank you so much. There is so much like power and influence and artistry in this room. I'm sort of overwhelmed by the change that could come out of today. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, artists and panelists, for sharing your expertise with us. Let's go have a cup of tea.